We don't do belly button to spine. Very rarely, unless somebody has very weak abdominals, will we tell them to bring their lower back to the ground. Instead, we want to train the spine in its natural position. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but first and foremost, that's how we move throughout the day. I personally choose to practice and also train and teach other people in a position that their body will be in a daily or typical daily movements, versus putting somebody into a position like belly button to spine, because I don't want people to move through their day like that.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Catalyst for Change podcast, where we present your professional health and fitness team. I'm Jim Adams. I'm the owner of Catalyst Personal Training in University City, and I'm here with another member of your professional health and fitness team, Nicole Coglianese, who owns Citra Fitness and Movement. Now, she does Pilates, yoga, aerial yoga, not area, aerial yoga. But she specifically calls her studio Fitness and Movement because she talks about and practices a lot of movement technique. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because she's going to be talking about neutral spine and how they use it specifically in Pilates. Nicole, welcome to the show. It's always good to see you. Always good to see your face. Every time I see you, you have your mask on. So it's always good to see your face.
This is what the whole thing looks like.
Well, you know, you're blessed, and everybody gets to see the studio, and I think it's a pretty cool space. I really do.
Thank you. I love it. It's fun.
Yeah, it's got kind of a New York kind of artsy vibe.
Yeah, this building is actually a former Ford manufacturing plant. So this was probably, I'm on the third floor here, so it's probably factory space.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, but they did a good job of converting it. It's a really cool space, and I like all the windows and the natural light. I'm a big fan of that. And this batch of plants, you seem to be doing a good job of keeping alive. So congratulations on that. You know, and we'll have a memorial for the last batch of plants. All right, so neutral pelvis. Talk to us about that and how it relates to Pilates.
Oh, well, where do I begin with neutral pelvis? So neutral pelvis is one concept that we use. To me, it's the easiest to come into. We're pretty connected. Typically, I will say most people are pretty connected to their hips and the way that their hips work, function in their body, but also when they lay down, they can typically feel imbalances in their hips. Shoulders will typically feel that as well, but it's a little bit different. The scapula, as I'm sure you know, they float in space a little bit more. They're not as connected to the spine, so it's a little bit harder to, I'm going to turn my AC up for just a second. It's a little bit harder to connect to the shoulders, and also it's hard for us to see our shoulders as well. So we don't have that connection to vision. So neutral pelvis is one aspect of neutral spine in Pilates. And neutral spine it's different for everyone. The goal is to get your spine into the most proper position for your body. And that is with the lumbar spine, depends on how you want to think about it, with a concave curve, thoracic spine more of a convex curve, and then the cervical spine typically mimicking the lumbar spine. So neutral pelvis is one aspect of neutral spine, and in order to get you or a practitioner into neutral spine, we have to focus on getting the pelvis to neutrality, the rib cage, and also the shoulders. So the main big bone groups or joints that connect to the spine, we get those into the proper position, and that way then the spine naturally kind of falls into place. So with something like neutral pelvis, why I focus on that when I first start working with people is we do have that connection more with our hips. Usually when people come in, Verbally, they'll talk about the way that their hips are. I have tight hips, you know, I feel it here. So that's something just in terms of awareness that I will focus on in order to then develop neutral spine from essentially the pelvis up to the shoulders.
Okay. And then, and I like that. And that sounds, great in theory, like when you're reading in a textbook, but when you bring it to the real world, I know that you get people in there that have, they've been sitting all day. They haven't been moving. Their shoulders are rounded forward. Their scapulars are kind of stuck out and they have a hard time getting them back in.
Yeah.
And their pelvis is what we call an anterior pelvic tilt, where it's tilted forward, compressing the low back, which can produce low back pain. So you get people that come in that are, for lack of a better term, stuck in that posture.
Totally.
So how do you work with them to get them out of that?
Well, first and foremost, it's awareness. So what you were talking about right there, that blends with neutrality in Pilates perfectly. So typically if the shoulders are rounded forward, you're going to have a posterior tilt of the pelvis. So if I can get their hips to come into more of an anterior tilt from where they're at, then their shoulders will typically go back to where they need to be. And then we can start strengthening those muscles supporting the shoulders to get them into place. I, as a practitioner and also a teacher, I like to work from the ground up. I think it's an easier way to work with somebody's body. So for me, unless they have a severe shoulder imbalance or something is specifically going on with the shoulder that I can target, I'm going to actually focus on the hips, then proper placement of the rib cage, and then the shoulders will typically fall into place from there, and then we can start strengthening and moving things around with those scapula that sort of float into space. So first and foremost, it's awareness, watching somebody as they come in, not only how their body moves, so body mechanics, but also how they hold their body when they're talking about their body. So that kind of goes into, I don't know if you're familiar with the Egoscue method. I believe his first name is Pete, his last name is Egoscue. He works with a lot of golfers, but he will also talk about the emotional ramifications, and Joseph Pilates talks about this as well, that will happen when, or that will be mimicked or reflected in the way that a person holds their body. So somebody that typically wants to keep people away or is very shy will round their shoulders forward. Then you start to get that posterior tilt. Then you're hyperextending the lumbar spine. So watching the way that people talk about their bodies when you're first starting to work with them will typically show you where they're at. Very similar if they have a severe posterior tilt, their rib cage is going to jut forward, and then usually their shoulders will typically, not always, then pull back as well. And that's more what you see with people who have, step back for a second, specifically most of the time with men, and who have a glute imbalance or weakness, then you start to see that large pot belly come out. And that's going to put a ton of pressure on their lower back, on the lumbar spine as well. So I think I got a little off track to your original question, but first and foremost, it's awareness, showing them where their body kind of lies in space, and then talking to them about where that came from. And that doesn't always have to be emotional. You know, a lot of times it's because of a car accident, some sort of trauma that the body was under. And what I've been seeing more and more lately with my private clients is they were given surgery on one side of their body first, and then maybe 10 years later, like a knee surgery or a hip surgery, and then 10 years later had the surgery on the opposite side. So that side of the body that they had the surgery on the second time, I'll just use like say the left side, had been carrying the right side for so long. And then that side of the body had surgery. And for some reason, with the people that I've been working with lately, that left side body will still be dominant, will still be trying to take over and carry the right side. And that goes into awareness, again, mental awareness of what the body is doing. All that being said, neutral spine isn't for everyone at first. Specifically if people have weak abdominal muscles or an extremely tight lower back. So where a lot of people will train the core, specifically with like crunches, in what I hear instructors say a lot, like belly button to spine. We typically, as Pilates instructors, don't cue that most of the time. What we have is called imprint for somebody who does have weaker abdominals and they need to slightly tuck the pelvis under. So coming to a little bit of a posterior tilt to actually lengthen the lumbar spine and somewhat lengthen, but also engage the obliques a little bit to stabilize the pelvis there. So essentially using the back body to stabilize the pelvis. But our goal is to then come into neutrality with the pelvis.
Yeah,
So
and
even in crunches, we don't do belly button to spine. Very rarely, unless somebody has very weak abdominals, will we tell them to bring their lower back to the ground. Instead, we want to train the spine in its natural position. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but first and foremost, that's how we move throughout the day. I personally choose to practice and also train and teach other people in a position that their body will be in a daily or typical daily movements versus putting somebody into a position like belly button to spine, because I don't want people to move through their day like that. It rounds the shoulders forward. It shortens the front line of the body as well. And it also puts a lot of strain on the lower back vertebrae. So if you did a frontal cut of my spine, me standing right here, and you thought about the spine as in front of spine and back of spine, so front side facing the organs, back side facing behind me, when you come into something like belly button to spine, you're then compressing the front of the spine and opening up the back and forcing the discs back, which can cause herniation in the discs. So that is a huge reason to not train that way as well. But for me, first and foremost is I want you to be able to move through your day and through your life today, tomorrow, and 50 years from now. So I'm going to train your body in the way that its natural position is in as much as possible.
yeah, that's really interesting. You said a lot that I want to unpack a little bit. And I'll start, instead of going all the way back to the beginning, I'm going to go back and hopefully I can remember what the last thing was by the time I get there. But the first thing you talked about, what I really like what you said is that you train people how you want them to move throughout their day. And I really like that because I know when it comes to specificity of training, and I just like using that word whenever I can work it into a sentence in the day, score. So, but I know specificity of training is really, really important. Whether you're training people, you know, an accountant or a professional athlete, it's really, really important if you want it to translate into better performance. And in some people's cases, that's just going through their day without pain. So if you can get people moving, training the way you want them to move, I think that's always infinitely better. And then the other thing that you were saying that I was really interested in, and I want to learn more about, is people's posture when they talk about themselves. I found that really interesting. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm not as well versed as some of the people that I work with, some of my teachers, when it comes to watching somebody's body. And then when you start engaging with them, seeing basically mapping out where there might be imbalance and where there might be dysfunction. So, and I hate to use those negative terms, but that's kind of the easiest way to think about it. So it's something that I'm still learning for sure. I first got interested in it with body mechanics. So learning more about body mechanics and watching people move. Real creepy thing to say, but I find myself doing it all the time. Like even at Schnucks, people are probably like, why is she staring at my shoulders right now? It's all I can.
Confession time, a taxi cab confession. I do the same thing. I love when I fly and I sit at the airport because I can watch everybody move. I'm like, that guy's got something going on with his right hip. that guy
Yeah.
definitely has back pain, you know.
Mhm.
And I sit there and I don't even, it just happens. It's just part of me now. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
don't think it's creepy at all.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page. Got a
Yeah,
kindred soul here.
yeah,
But as I started working more with teachers who had been working with a lot more people and had a lot more experience than I had, they got me to ask more questions with people. And that started off, like I said, with body mechanics, seeing how somebody holds their body to begin with, seeing how they talk about their body. And that's typically with private clients. You know, initially when you meet somebody in a group class, you do get a chance, do you have any injuries? And they spout off some stuff. And you ask them if they know how to modify, and if they do, cool. If not, you add those modifications into your class, and that's kind of the end of it. You know, you move through a group class. As I started working with more private clients, I started noticing that I was working with something specifically and not fixing it. Fixing might be the wrong word to use there, but that's how I was looking at it back then. So somebody came into me, all right, I've got a shoulder problem. I worked with a lot of, when I was in Houston, I worked with a lot of tennis players. So shoulder and elbow problems all the way down to the wrist, sometimes going up into TMJ as well. That was pretty common too. But you know, I would then, all right, we're gonna focus on shoulders. We're gonna open up your shoulders. We're doing this with shoulders. Cool. And I knew from my training, you know, the body doesn't just work compartmentalized. We've got to work the whole system. So I wasn't just working their shoulders, but it was sort of getting personal, honestly, when I was like, all right, they're not making the progress that I want them to. And it's not their fault. I'm their teacher. How can I make this better? And that's when I started talking to, you know, instructors that had a lot more experience than I did, and were working with people, a broader population of people, and also over a longer period of time. And they taught me to get people talking and to watch what they do when they talk. So sometimes people have lived in pain for so long that they don't even, they'll only register the new pain. The old one sort of goes off
fades
the
into the
radar.
background. Yeah. Hmm.
And it's only when you get them talking about it and seeing the way that they move, or somebody will be like, yeah, you know, my shoulder, it's really bothering me. And then I see the way that they are standing. All right, maybe they're standing back onto their left heel. Why are they, what's going on with their right foot? And even from the way that the right foot is sitting, then I'll ask them about that. Like, hey, what's going on with your, you know, your right side? Oh, well, yeah, I was in a car accident actually, and that hip dislocated, but that's been like 20 years. I think it's fine. And actually what I found is that something, you know, that's going on usually on one side of the body is triggered by something going on in the other side of the body. So getting people to open up about that. And also, one thing that I love to do in my private lessons is get somebody moving. And as they start to become more aware of their body, all right, where do you feel that? Where are you feeling it? I can sit there and tell them, hey, I want your glutes to engage here. But if those glutes aren't firing, maybe their quadriceps are dominant in the movement, and I don't want them to do that. So how can I talk them through then engaging those glutes, or releasing another muscle group to see if I can get them to activate that? So a lot of it is just talking to people and getting them talking about their body, and getting them acquainted with their body as well. I had actually a private client today. I was talking to her about her feet and the position of her feet, and she was doing what I was saying, but I could see her face sort of like, oh, what the hell is going on? You know, she was doing all this thing with her forehead, and she finally, she's like, I have no idea where my toes are at right now. She was following what I was saying, but it was so difficult for her to do that. But even making that neural connection, I think, was huge in class. And hopefully she'll start to be able to become more aware of her feet now through movement in general.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that that's one thing that I've noticed for myself since I started taking Pilates with you, is that I notice, and I would think I was telling you about this, I notice where I hold my weight in my feet when I'm walking and when I'm standing. And then the other thing that I notice is that while my spinal mobility is much better. And so I never I didn't fully, like when we did that episode about intentional movement, I couldn't fully wrap my head around it. But then I don't know, one day in class when we were doing like these things where we go back, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to do Pilates in public because I'll embarrass you. They're like, oh my God, who teaches that guy? But um, it's one of those things that we all talk about, like we want to move better, we need to do this exercise, and we need to do these movements, we need to carve time out of our day to do it, and all of these things, but we
Yeah.
just don't, unless we have a coach or somebody to hold us accountable. And so for me, it's not that, I mean, obviously, more about Pilates than I will ever want to know. But also you get to coach me on my movement, because like I said, I know the least about my own movement, and it keeps me accountable. I know I have that appointment, and then sometimes sometimes when you kick my ass, I do quit a little bit early, but I always try to push as hard as I can and push through. And it's harder than I would work on my own.
Yeah.
So for all those reasons, that's why I think it's great to have like a movement coach, because it's one of the things that we really lose as we get older, and it's one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it real quick. Yeah. So you also wanted to talk about, or you talked about the belly to spine. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on?
Doming or coning of the abs.
Yes, thank you. I
So
forgot
this is
before I
where
went off on my tangent.
it's okay. I won't let you forget about doming and coning because it's the nemesis of my life. It's sort of my kryptonite. So this is where I think the concept of belly button to spine came about. When we train the abs in Pilates, specifically the core, we don't just focus on the abdominal muscles or what people think about the abdominal muscles, because those are typically thought of as the front of the body. We actually train in almost like a corset fashion, so the entire core from your back wrapping all the way inward. So when I talk about like when we do roll-ups or some sort of like crunch variation in Pilates, and I tell you to bring your abs down towards your lower back without letting your lower back come down to the machine, that is to prevent doming or coning. And that is when the abdominal muscles start to lift upward or outward, depending on how you're training them.
Mm-hmm.
Abs are muscles. They're going to grow the way that you train them to grow. But if you keep doing that, what's going to happen is those abdominal muscles are going to keep coming forward. They're going to get heavier because they're growing as muscles. Then you start to put pressure on the lumbar spine. You start to get that deep posterior tilt. Typically then the hip flexors will tighten and the lower abs will stretch as well. Now, there's reasons that we don't want that. Of course, most people aesthetically don't want that. They want their abdominal muscles to wrap around them and to be flat. I mean, if we're just going to talk about aesthetics, that's typically what people want. But also from like a medical standpoint, your abdominal muscles are designed to, or an anatomical perspective, your abdominal muscles are designed to support your spine, attach your pelvis to your spine. They've got a lot of purposes, but just for the purposes of this video, but also to hold your internal organs where they need to be. Yes, you've got fascia in there as well. There's tendon, there's ligaments, but the abdominal muscles hold them back so that you're not herniating anything. If you start to let those muscles grow forward, you almost create a vacuum effect on your intestines, and they will start to pull forward as well. And people tend to have gas then, a lot of digestive problems as well. And then they lose connection from what I've seen, and it's probably not all the time, but just what I've seen in my clients, they typically lose connection to their glutes as well. And I think that's because they're carrying their weight so far forward that the quadriceps have to start to take over. And then the back of their body will also get very tight as well.
So. Interesting.
Yes. So
Interesting.
there's a ton of reasons why we don't want doming or coning, but specifically health wise, that's definitely huge.
Yeah, because like you said, I mean, your abdominals are people are going to go the way that you train them. You know, I always tell people your body's not a machine. It's a dynamic organism. It will,
It really is.
respond to whatever stimulus you give it.
Mhm.
So yeah, if you want, flat abdominals that keep your intestines nice and snug, then
Yes.
train them that way. I like
Right.
that. Okay. Awesome. Well, Nicole, as always, this has been fun. I always look forward to seeing you. And you guys will see her again next month again, because she's going to be a regular guest on the show. She's part of your professional health and fitness team. So, Nicole, I know you are the best at cross promoting. You do a lot of community stuff, and you're really good at that.
Thank
So I have to commend you on that. Can you tell people what events you got coming up?
you.
Where can they find you, or can they go to get more info, all that good stuff?
Yes. So all of my info on classes and events, you can go to Citra, Citra, fitness spelled commonly.com. So that's my website. I do have a full moon class coming up. That's at Jefferson Underground on the rooftop from 7:30 to 9 on July 25th. And then after that, Wellbeing, which Wellbeing is a local company that makes CBD seltzers and NA beers. They're going to do a little after party, so you get a free seltzer or NA beer, and you get to hang out with pretty much the coolest people in St. Louis. So that's fun. You can find that on the website. I'm also hosting a blood drive on August 8th, and I would love for everyone to come check that out. That you can sign up. I've got events on Facebook that will link you right to the American Red Cross Citra blood drive specifically, but you can also find that on the American Red Cross app as well. So that'll be August 8th here in the studio from noon to 5. And I am also going to be on the food roof, and that's Urban Harvest STL. That is a class designed to bring awareness to what Urban Harvest's mission is, which they've got a few food roofs throughout town where they grow fresh food and they donate it to local food pantries that typically don't get fresh food. And they also offer education on nutrition and how to grow your own food as well to areas like North St. Louis that typically don't have grocery stores available to get fresh food. So that'll be on July 23rd at 7, and that you can also find on my Facebook page, because I'm not actually the host of that. I'll just be teaching it, but it's a great cause and a wonderful organization. I think that's it. I think that's all I have.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't you have something at Shafley too?
Oh yeah, so that's through SweatNet. That's
Okay.
thanks for reminding me. That's drop sound yoga. So that we do with headphones, and the headphones are kind of like Bose headphones. They isolate outside noise, and we pump music through there, and then my lovely voice just floats right through those headphones and guides you through the whole practice. So at first, it's at least for me, it was a little odd because I had something on my head that I wasn't used to, and direct sound coming in without outside noises. But once you get immersed into it, it's super cool. So SweatNet is how you can find those classes, and that's, I believe, sweatnetstl.com, and that's Schlafly Drop Sound Summer Yoga Series.
Awesome. Yeah, I told you she is the best at cross promoting. So she did not disappoint. So be sure to check all of those things out. And all of those links will be in the show notes. Just go to Catalyst STL / podcast, catalyststl.com / podcast, and look for this episode. Click on this episode, and the links for all those cool events will be right there. And so I think that's all. Nicole, thanks again, as always. And until next time, we hope you guys are well.
Take care.
Bye.